Hello, and welcome to our webcast. I'm Amy Pendergrass with Moss Adams, and I'm going to get us started for today's session, an economic update, the impact of recovery and upside forces. Before we begin, I'm going to play our housekeeping video.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us. We're pleased to present another in our ongoing series of continuing professional education webcasts to help companies and individuals conquer challenges as they plan for what's next. Our presentation will start in a few moments. Before we begin, here are a few things to keep in mind. You can customize how you both view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can also adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons, each relating to a different aspect of our session. You can download the group attendance sheet and a PDF copy of today's slides from the slide deck and handouts widget to the right of the slide view. You can ask our presenter questions during the webcast by typing a question in the Q&A window below the slide view and clicking submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions during the presentation or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty during today's presentation, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session will offer you 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the requirements as specified by the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of the polling questions, which we'll ask throughout today's presentation. To respond to a poll, click the button next to your answer. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget to open a PDF file that you can save to your computer. Don't worry if you can't download your PDF certificate today. We'll email a copy to you in 2 weeks. If you're attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our attendance sheet to receive CPE credit. The attendance sheet is available in the slide deck and handouts widget. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. Also note that CPE credit can be awarded only to participants registered as themselves and isn't available to participants who view the on-demand version. As a reminder, the presentation you're about to see isn't legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
All right, and now I would like to turn the floor over to Dustin Barashk, partner at Moss Adams, to introduce today's presenter.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce John Mitchell, owner of M&H Economic Consultants. John brings over 50 years of experience making economic presentations on the nation and region. He was a professor of economics at Boise State University for 13 years before joining U.S. Bancorp in July of 1983. He was the chief economist of U.S. Bancorp until July of 98 and served as the economist Western Region for U.S. Bank until July 2007. It's my pleasure to introduce John Mitchell.
Thanks, Dustin. It's very nice to be here on this extraordinarily exciting day. If we think about where we are, I'm gonna get this thing. Here we are in September 2021. The way I like to think about this week, it's 2 down, 17 up in a Delta world. We had a 2-month recession. The output recovery is over. I mean, we've already made up for the recession losses. We've got record job openings, and we've been on a downtrend in initial unemployment claims. Although they jumped up this morning, but the last couple of weeks seem to have been impacted perhaps by that hurricane, but they're well below where they were, obviously, last year. We have rising home prices. The Case-Shiller Index this week, the national index for July was up 19.7%. Inflation concerns, major policy changes that are coming at the present time. We're in the midst of some grand experiments, and we don't know how they're going to play out. We've got a drag from the Delta version of the virus, which is, for a while, increased infections has resulted in some slowdowns in activity that may be passing. And it's such an incredible time with the battles between vaccinated versus non-vaccinated, the mask conflicts, and the polarization that I suspect many people on the call find pretty disturbing. If we look at sort of the output stuff, just to go back over the course of the last, almost couple of years, you've seen, look, the sharp decline in output in the second quarter of 2020, falling at an annual rate of over 30%, and the rebound in the third quarter as restrictions were lifted. Then we've continued to grow. We've continued to grow since that point in time, and again, from an output standpoint, we're back up over the pre-recession levels of output. Lots of volatility on the consumption side as people were, stuck at home with shutdowns, closures of non-essential businesses. Then you've seen a lot of volatility there, but it's continued. It's basically continued to increase, and of course that's the largest part of output. There's lots of interest in what's going on, obviously, on the employment side. You see the dramatic decline last April, where in essence, almost 21 million jobs disappeared. We lost a decade's job growth. The unemployment rate is now down to 5.2%. It was up over 14% last year. And if you look at the details, there's allegedly 5.7 million people not in the labor force, but they want a job. 4.5 million part-time for economic reasons. The participation rate, the fraction of the adult population in the labor force, has dropped from where it was prior to the downturn in February of 2020. That's about, there'd be about 4.1 million more people if it was the same. High levels of job vacancies, 10.9 million. And yet we're still a little over 5 million jobs below where we were in February of 2020. You can see that August move was sort of a disappointment. The markets were expecting something higher than that. Now, there's a lot of interest in the labor stuff. One of the interesting things now is, notice on the left-hand side of this slide, the quit rate. The quit rate is the fraction of the employed people who are thinking about quitting are going to quit their jobs. Notice it's a sword. When do you quit your job? You quit your job when you are optimistic you can presumably find something else. Okay. On the right-hand side is the participation rate. And you can see the way that plunged with the onset of the pandemic, and then it's come back from what it was, but it hasn't come all the way back. And that's going to be a critical issue as we go forward. The participation rate. If you wander around now, and I know you're from all over the country, but I expect you're struck by the ubiquitous nature of the help wanted signs. They seem to be almost everywhere. Okay, and at the same time, you have this concern about unemployment. People will be studying this for a long time. Part of it, earlier this year and last year, we're closed schools. Okay, when schools were closed, oftentimes a parent, in many cases, of course, the woman would drop out of the labor force to take care of the kids. There's been a big increase in homeschooling as the schools were closed, almost a doubling in those numbers in an interesting piece by John Malden. Daycare issues. Okay. No place for the kids to go. The daycare centers were closed. That can obviously impact people's participation in the labor force. Old baby boomers, will they be back? One of the things we have to remember, if you look at, the first Friday of the month when the unemployment stuff comes out, remember, it's a snapshot. You've got stuff going on all the time. People entering, leaving, quitting, getting hired, status continually changing. But one of the interesting things in terms of the elderly in the labor force or old baby boomers, the retirement rate doesn't seem to have increased very much, but the re-entry rate has sharply declined. They're leaving, but others aren't coming in. That may be due to the strength in the financial markets or fear, but it's an interesting subject to study. Extra unemployment compensation. For a long time, people talked about, extra unemployment compensation, people could earn as much, in some cases more, by not working, but that's over. Fear of the virus. Prioritization in the sense of, you look at what's gone on the last couple of years, some people staying out of the labor force perhaps to care for relatives, putting family first if they were financially able. Family support has become much more important. If you don't have a fallback position because the daycare centers are closed, schools are closed, that may explain some of the decline. And structural change. We know that, restaurants and hotels, employment is well below the pre-recession levels still. Maybe people leaving those jobs, big increases in warehousing and transportation. When you have those kinds of changes, it takes time. It takes time for people to move. Immigration changes, decline in legal immigration, maybe playing a role in shortages of labor. The financial situation. We all know that financial markets, ignoring the last few days, have gone up substantially. Net worth has expanded. So people saying, I can stay out. Or with the stimmy checks and the child credits, maybe we don't have to participate the way that we did before. If you think back, go back to February of 2020. If you looked at what was going on then, and read the Beige Book, people were complaining about can't find people, rapid increases in wages, particularly at the entry level. That's where we are now. We've gone back to that. That environment, but at a lower level of participation. Let's play with one of the polling questions. We've done this at other Moss Adams events about work status. Are you working remotely, still working remotely, gone back to the office, or hybrid situation?
And John, this is Amy. I'm going to jump in real quick. I just want to let the audience know to respond, you're going to click the button next to the answer you choose and hit submit. And if you can't see the submit button, you will probably most likely just need to enlarge your slide area to see those. All right, John, here are the results.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. The numbers still working remotely at over 36%, and then the importance or the size of that hybrid situation at 35%, and a small fraction that had not worked remotely. So we're still not there. Still a lot of people working remotely all the time, and it'll be interesting over time how that hybrid situation changes. I think this is taking a lot longer to resolve than people had thought. And you continue to read about firms delaying the return to the office. You know, clearly it's a different environment. Well, let's talk about inflation. And I don't know the age range of the people on this call, but I suspect a lot of you were not sort of paying attention to the economy back in the late 60s or the 1970s. So if you look at what's gone on, the Consumer Price Index through August up year over year at 5.3%, the core at 4%. On the graph, you can see, if you look at last April, May, June, where that little green arrow is, you can see you had very low rates of inflation, underneath 1%. A lot of that reflected the weakness at the time in energy prices, airline fares, hotels, that sort of thing. Well, you knew when that ended, you were going to see an uptick in the inflation rate. And sure enough, we're now up running a bit over 5%. Okay. The Personal Consumption Expenditure Index up 4.2. The core there 3.6. We'll get the August one will come out this week. But no question, we've had this acceleration in inflation. Now, just one point. Think about what inflation is, an ongoing increase in the general price level. The Fed has had a target of 2% since 2012. Well, clearly they're above that target now. Much of the time they have been below that target. And that led to a change in policy, which I'll talk about later. Now, if you look at this inflation stuff, obviously a year after the recession, you're going to get the arithmetic of a sharp jump in the price level. We've seen that. Demand shifts. If you think about how we acted during the downturn, we were stuck at home. Many cases, people shifted buying from services like eating out, travel, that sort of thing, to stuff, be it electronics, home remodel, bicycles, that sort of thing. There was a major change in the structure of demand. At the same time, COVID disrupted supply chains. You know, you continue to read about, well, this company shut down because COVID impacted the labor force. So we've had a lot of disruption and run up in travel cost or transportation costs, that sort of thing. But it's putting upward pressure on the price level. Then sort of shocks. Yeah, we always have shocks, but I suspect a year ago, most of us could not name a container ship. Now we know about the Ever Given, the one that got stuck in the Suez Canal. We've had poor harvests in some areas, impacting things like coffee prices and the like. The Texas storms and the impact on petrochemicals. COVID in Southeast Asia, disrupting production there. Chips and shoes. Chip plant fire in Japan. Partial port closures, Ningbo in China due to COVID. The transportation bottlenecks. Many container ships waiting off the coast to be unloaded, but pressing capacity at the ports. Then you get Ida disrupting energy production. There have been a lot of shocks over the course of the last year. Macro policy. the stimulus that we've seen, monetary policy, fiscal policy, you have to wonder, in a supply-constrained world, is that putting pressure on the price level? Now, there's a lot of things to think about here. The big question, is this transitory? That's a word you see used a lot by the Federal Reserve, related to the reopening of the economy, things that will be resolved rather than the start of an ongoing increase in inflationary pressure. I mean, this is a critical issue for the Federal Reserve and for interest rates going forward. And you know, we're over 5% now on a year-over-year basis, but the last time inflation was over 5% was 1990. Okay, that was on an annual basis. That was a long time ago, and not in the memory of much of the population. August, okay, we saw the consumer price index gains slowed. They were the lowest in August since February. And if you look at what Chairman Powell said at the Jackson Hole conference, well, it was done virtually this year, the spike in inflation is so far largely the product of a relatively narrow group of goods and services directly affected by the pandemic and the reopening. That was reaffirmed at the last Federal Reserve meeting. Now, if you look on the right-hand side, okay, from the New York Fed, median inflation expectations in the population in August have risen to over 5%. Now, that's what they've been experiencing, but it's worrisome in the sense that rising expectations may be spill over into behavior. We'll have to see. Now, if you think about the Fed and monetary policy, remember, as the pandemic got going, the Fed was buying $120 billion a month in securities, 80 billion treasuries, 40 billion mortgage-backed. This was what they had done in the financial crisis back in 2007, 8, 9. They announced in August of last year a new operating policy that they would tolerate inflation above 2% after a period of below target inflation. It's FATE, flexible average inflation targeting. This is new. This is a new policy announced a year ago in August. We've not been through a cycle with this. If you look at the Fed's most recent rate projections, which came out of their meeting last week, that rates are going to stay down. They won't be increasing rates until 2022. Prior to the last meeting, rates were expected to stay down until 2023. Okay, so it's interesting. You've seen the Fed shift its expectations. The 10-year security, which of course is one that's used as a base for a lot of loans and for mortgages and the like. Okay, the 10-year was 1.31 on the 20th of September. Okay, the last day I could get before I sent this in at 9:27, it was 1.48, and yesterday, the day before, it went up over 1.5. Okay, so we've seen rates start to rise with the higher inflation number and the Fed getting closer to a change in policy. Now, I don't know if Wendy and Danielle knew this, but today is the 40th anniversary of the all-time high in the 10-year. On September 30th, 1981, the 10-year security had an annual yield of 15.82%. If you just think about that. U.S. government securities, 10-year, almost a 16% annual yield. Okay, now we're basically at about 1.5%. A pretty incredible change. Now, if you look at the graph over on the right-hand side, you can just start to see that run up in rates that we've witnessed recently. Now, if we think about what the Federal Reserve is going to do. If you look at their meeting in July, what they decided, and they repeated this in their meeting in September, reaffirmed it in August, to keep the target federal funds rate in 0 to 0.25%, expects it'll be appropriate to maintain this until labor market conditions have reached levels consistent with the assessment of maximum employment, and inflation has risen to 2% and is on track to moderately exceed 2% for some time. Okay, that's their basic policy stance. Now notice, okay, we don't know what moderately exceed means, and we don't know for how long. They said on September 22nd, if progress continues as expected, the committee judges that a moderation in the pace of asset purchases may soon be warranted. That's the $120 billion a month. Chairman Powell went out of his way to say when they start to reduce security purchases, that is not a direct signal regarding the timing of interest rate increases. He also said the Fed is being very careful not to try to offset what are likely to be temporary fluctuations in inflation, like the reopening stuff. That's where they are. The expectation is that they are going to start to reduce the purchases of securities within the next couple of months. Let's see what your expectations are. As to when do you think the Fed is going to raise the federal funds target, which is now 0 to 0.25%?
And John, while people are responding to this polling question, I do want to let the audience know that we do see several questions and comments coming through the Q&A window. So thank you for that. But we are going to have some time towards the end to address those with the audience. So keep them coming.
Presumably we'll have time at the end.
All right, here are the results.
Okay, that's interesting. Predominantly next year and second half of 22, most popular, or some even later. Well, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. The Fed has been shifting more toward 2022. Previously, it was 2023, and recently you've seen it move to 2022. Well, time will tell. All right, fiscal policy, and of course, this had to be written before the events of the last few days. But of course, remember since last year, we had the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, more stimmies, state and local governments, rental assistance, higher premium subsidies. You've seen all that. We've got an infrastructure plan that passed the Senate, in the House. Maybe there'll be a vote on that this week. We've got the debt ceiling shutdown drama going on. Hopefully we'll have some resolution of the shutdown stuff today. We've got the $3.5 trillion sort of climate education bill passed. The budget resolution is passed. Perhaps the Democrats can do it alone. There seems to be some conflict there. We'll see what's going to happen. Lots of stuff in there: paid family leave, child care programs, extension of the tax credit, expanded Medicare, universal pre-K, tuition-free community college, lots of stuff. Financed by a variety of tax increases, corporate high income, capital gains, not finalized as yet. I suspect it'll be a lot more work for a lot of the people who are on this phone call. Now, if we think about 2021, I think of it, it was going to be a very strong year, and it's still going to be a very strong year, because you had a lot of stuff come together. Okay, the vaccine distribution and effectiveness, the fiscal stimulus with the bill that we had in March of this year, as well as the stuff at the end of 2020. The ongoing monetary policy support. You look at the GDP data, you see inventories have been drawn down, and they're going to have to be replaced. Until the last few weeks, we saw a lessening in restrictions. We've seen some tightening as a result of the Delta variant. And the schools reopening to face-to-face learning, hopefully getting people back in the labor force. You look at balance sheets. Balance sheets of consumers are very, very strong. Relatively, the credit quality. I know there's bankers on here. Credit quality has been good, but the buts. You got to worry about the current COVID wave. Now, the high-frequency data has shown some softening. You've seen some major national firms revise down their forecasts. Now, it may be turning. Restaurant reservations, which had dropped for a while, have bottomed out. TSA counts, which have declined, are showing some stability. So, watch how this plays out. You've got declining hospitalizations. It may be passing. It's expected to be temporary until whenever the next wave comes along. Going to be a good year, but the questions are there about the Delta variant. Now, the household stuff is really pretty interesting. The Fed does the changes in net worth that you're probably familiar with. It comes out quarterly. And, if you look at what's happened, the changes in net worth for households and nonprofits, okay, in the first quarter of 2021, net worth rose by about $5 trillion. The fourth quarter, it was up $8 trillion. You saw the decline in the second quarter or the first quarter of last year, but then the markets rebounded. And as you all know, it's house prices, it's equity prices. They've rebounded significantly. Reduced debt payments. The financial obligations ratio, that's the fraction of disposable income that goes to pay debts as well as things like car leases, rent of homes, homeowners insurance, and the financial obligations ratio declined. Okay. Basically, household balance sheets are in pretty good shape. Okay. Then that bodes well going forward from a spending standpoint. Okay, let's see where you stand on inflation. The expectation of using the Consumer Price Index in 2022.
All right, it looks like we have some coming through. I just want to remind everyone that you do need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions to qualify for the CPE for today. It looks like most everyone has responded, so here are the results.
Okay, 2022. All right, people basically expecting it to be higher than what we have seen in recent years, but yeah, almost 42% saying subsiding relative to the current level. So accepting the transitory notion. Okay. Now, it'd be interesting if it comes into the 3.5 range, say 3.5%, how the Fed will react, if they will regard that as acceptable. Okay. Okay. Now, got to talk, a little bit about housing. I mean, people seem to be very interested in what's going on there. It's been a perfect storm for sellers. Low levels of inventory, strong demand, mortgage rates down in the 3% vicinity, the preferences for, last year, if you're working at home, want to have a house, maybe a bigger house, because you got to have one room for schooling, one room for my office. But you look at the demographics, millennials are in the home buying demographic. The pandemic's distorted things, made it difficult in some cases for showings, that sort of thing, a year ago in the spring. You got supply chain issues in terms of getting stuff produced, appliances, paints, carpeting. That's impacted the housing sector. The second quarter purchase-only data from the Federal Housing Finance Agency, house prices were going up in all states. Idaho was number 1, okay, at 37.06%. This is a paired index. Look at the same houses over time, mortgages purchased by Fannie and Freddie. Alaska was at the bottom with an 8.2% increase. So, I mean, this is broad-based across the country. There's an affordability constraint emerging. Rising home prices and falling rates in 2020, helped offset each other, but rates have bottomed out. Rates are now rising somewhat, and you've got rising income, but the affordability index, the ability of a median family to buy a median house, is declining. The expectation is that the strength in housing is going to continue from the demographic patterns, and you'll see a lessening, I believe, of supply chain emphasis and of supply chain issues, and there's a lot of emphasis on policy for trying to increase the supply. You've seen some changes in legislation reflect in an effort to reduce the barriers to home construction. I got a list of everybody who'd signed up for this conference a couple of weeks ago, and pulled the house price index. The house price index from the Federal Housing Finance Agency to show you what's happened as of quarter 2, the year-over-year change in house prices. And it's sort of interesting on the people on the call. You can see Alaska was at the bottom of 8.12%, but building permit, and then on the other column through July is building permits this year compared to last year. You look at this and get an idea of the increase in permitting activity and the price ranges. It's sort of interesting. I highlighted Utah, which was the highest on this list, gains of over 28% in the home prices. And you can see look at permits for the first 7 months, up essentially 52%. But you see the strength in residential construction activity around the country, responding to the demand. Okay. We're not the same. It's coming back, and I keep thinking about, okay, what's different? There's been scarring, careers and education interrupted. Okay, some employers disappeared. Seen weakening enrollment in higher education. Then in grade school, high school, kindergarten, education is interrupted. There'll be long-term implications of that. The transitions to industries that are growing, some industries weakening, that implies difficulties for people picking up new skills, the process of finding a job, perhaps moving. Hysteresis, the experience changes you. The period of weak labor market activity may have led to some people to pick up habits that won't necessarily help them in the labor force. Just like tight labor markets can give people advantages in training and opportunity, but it's clearly different. I keep thinking about Joseph Schumpeter's Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, and the notion of creative destruction. Okay. New ways of doing things, new stuff comes along. It happens all the time. It's not anything specific to this cycle, but we're, I think, very aware of it. Output has recovered, employment has not. One of the things that tell you is you've seen increases in productivity, output per person, as firms have reacted to the technology, to the trying to reduce face-to-face contact, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of creative destruction going on. You think about the way we shop. E-commerce went from 13% of retail activity, shot up. It's now, or went from 11%, up to about 16%. It's now dropped back a little bit, not all the way back. That's going to be a permanent change. The payment system, telemedicine, okay, which got off to a slow start, got a major boost during the downturn. Meetings, look at the way we're doing this. A lot of hybrid stuff going on. We saw that in the polling questions, meetings being done on a hybrid basis, social distancing, reducing face-to-face contact. Okay, you know, it's fascinating. Go through an airport, you know, and you don't have a lot of interaction with people. You're interacting with a console. Banking and the increase in mobile banking that we've seen as a result of this process. Options have expanded. Look at in the polling question here, the number of people in the hybrid work environment. Geographic changes. Hey, if it's hybrid and I only got to go to the office once a week or twice a week, I can live in a different place. I can live further away. I can get that acreage. Okay, it's different. There's grand experiments underway. Now, the modern monetary theory: spend what you want in order to attain your goal. Tighten if there's a capacity constraint and inflation appears. And if interest rates are below the growth rate, you can grow your way out of the debt, as we did after World War II. Oh, we're doing that. People, firms, institutions respond to incentives and the environment. Okay, you know, economists love that stuff. Well, we're changing incentives. The environment is changing. How are people going to react? Raise business taxes. I see that on television all the time. Make businesses pay their fair share. Well, the question becomes, who pays? Business doesn't pay any taxes. They collect them from the owners, customers, or employees in some combination. The regulatory pendulum shift. Antitrust, for example, what's happening there, the environmental stuff, okay? It's shifting, different people in charge. We have never operated with flexible average inflation targeting. This is new. How high will inflation be allowed to go? How long will it run above target? We don't know. And the world is having to develop institutions and policies for global pandemics. Okay. You know, it hadn't been a front burner, but now it gets a lot more attention. Look at what's happened. It didn't start here, but it's had major impacts around the world. I love to use Job Growth Update, comes out of Arizona State University, at BLS. Notice all states are growing. This is August data, the most recent. Okay, every state is growing. Note numbers 1 and 2. Okay, Hawaii and Nevada. No great surprise there, given they were so decimated by the downturn. And as when you get reopenings and traveling again, you start to see them rise to the top. If we had looked at this, say, last March, in March of 2021, on a year-over-year basis, there were only 2 states that were growing. Idaho was number 1, Utah was number 2, okay? But now everybody's coming back. I thought this might be of interest to people. This is August 2021 unemployment rate, and then April 2020 unemployment rates. April 2020 being the maximum for many areas and for the nation. Sort of interesting. Now I've got Nebraska, okay, which in April 2020 was at 8.3. In August of 2021, it's down to 2.2. Nevada had the highest, 28.2. It's now down to 7.7. But you can see, okay, as the labor market employment has moved up, how the unemployment rates have come down around the country. Some of the moves are quite dramatic. In some cases, they're back. You know, places like South Dakota down to 2.9%. You can see some areas have back to very low unemployment rates. Just to show a couple of states, I like to show different states have obviously had different experiences. Utah and the places that were on the call on the list I had have been the strongest, okay, and Hawaii had been relatively weak. I went February of 2020, okay, is 100, okay. You've got Hawaii is the light green, Utah's the dark green. You can see what happened. Look at Utah first. You know, Utah dropped and then came up and is now, again, back above pre-recession levels. Hawaii dropped and had a much more sluggish rebound and is still not back up to pre-recession levels. You know, different states have had different experiences. Utah is the extreme at the upper end, and Hawaii at the other end. So where are we going? Okay, expectations for 2021. You know, 5 to 6% growth. Rates and inflation higher. Inflation running into 4 to 5%. 2022 still up but slower. Inflation lowers as the transitory elements fade, somewhere down in 3 to 3.5%. The virus remains a threat to the outlook. There's lots of policy questions. We don't know what the outcome of this week's going to be. The mandate issue, the monetary policy change, the Fed has never done this before, operating with its new rules. And there's high levels of uncertainty. Let's try this one. Stock prices, okay, I'm using the S&P 500. It was up almost 19% to September 24th. I couldn't obviously get today's. Where do you think stock prices are going to be next year?
And a few reminders while everyone is responding. Once you have completed all CPE requirements, you will be able to download a PDF of your certificate from the CPE progress window. And then also, if you want a copy of today's slides, you can download those from the handouts folder in your console. And we will also be sending them out via email tomorrow, along with a recording of this webcast. All right, here are the results.
Okay. Almost half expecting higher than today. Interesting. A little over a third lower. Same. It's been an amazing run. Okay. That higher implies expect continued increases in earnings and not necessarily a run up in rates that would derail stock prices. All right, sort of in a quiet moment, thinking about what's going on. This virus may be a forever virus. Okay, there's an article in Foreign Affairs, July-August issue about the forever virus. We may have to live with this the rest of our lives because you get new variants mutating in the world's unvaccinated population and spreading across the planet. Okay. So, I mean, rather than thinking of this as an episode, this may be something we're just going to have to live with and get shots for, maybe on an annual basis, like we get our flu shot. And it's a global issue because we have a stake in, of course, what happens overseas, where even if we get all vaccinated, they're not, and the virus lives and mutates. You got to be concerned about the social cohesion. It's very disturbing to watch the battles over the vaccine, the virus, school openings, masks. We're not united. There's a long-term concern there. How will people behave? Consumers, investors, business decision makers, confronted with this new environment. Will the participation rate bounce back? Will it rebound? Or are we at full employment? It's an interesting question. What would you expect to see at full employment? Hiring signs all over the place, rising wages, curtailments because of inability to find people. We're seeing that stuff, or at least a lot of places are seeing that stuff. Maybe this is full employment given the environment that we're in. It's an interesting question. What happens if this inflation jump is not transitory? How will the Fed and when will the Fed react? Okay, will they tighten? Okay, to deal with to bring that inflation rate back down. We don't know how long they'll let it run where it is. The weakened link between work and income is sort of an interesting thing to think about. Okay, you've had all these various STEMI programs over the last couple of years. I like to use my granddaughter as an example. She's old enough to understand the STEMI. She lives in a household that had not suffered any income loss due to the downturn, and she got a trampoline with the STEMI funds, as opposed to babysitting or cutting lawns or whatever, or saving to get the thing. I mean, the idea that okay, the money just comes. Okay, I worry a little bit about that long term. We are observing the flexibility of a market system respond to an altered environment. That's one of its strengths, and we are getting a front row seat to watching those changes. I don't like to end on any kind of a pessimistic note. I want to throw this out. It's easy to get down, okay? But what if things go right? What if inflation is transitory? The Fed tapering is a non-event. What if supply chains get resolved over the next 4 or 5 months? If business investment strengthens, the funds are there, and people take advantage of the new technology and productivity accelerates, the tight labor market brings opportunity and participation for those who've been disadvantaged, and people come back in. That's a pretty positive outlook. And we don't get a replay of the 60s and the 70s. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I'd be glad to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, John. We have just a couple minutes left. I know that there's quite a few questions that have come through, so if we're not able to get to it, we'll do our best to connect afterwards. First one is, John, what's the risk of default if the debt ceiling is not lifted?
Oh, well, I think the risk there is the debt ceiling. If we were to go into default, the loss of trust in U.S. obligations, I think, would be very serious. You'd see a jump up in interest rates, something that's generally regarded from a default standpoint as a risk-free obligation. You'd see interest rates rise. I think it's a very serious issue, and Congress has not let that happen. Hopefully, they will not do it this time. But remember, this is the world's reserve currency, a trusted asset, and I don't think we want to put that kind of stuff at risk.
Thank you. Next one is, how is the housing boom likely to end this time? A replay of 2007 to 2009?
I don't think that's the most likely scenario. I think the key difference this time around is that you've had much more stringent underwriting. It's not, if you have a pulse, you can get a loan. It's been much more stringent, higher down payments, generally higher quality, and that underlying demand, we haven't built enough to keep up with the demographics, to change preferences. So I think what will likely happen, you will see a slowing in the rate of increase in home prices, but it will continue at relatively high levels.
Thank you, John. Amy, let's turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Justin. Yeah, unfortunately, we are at time, so thank you, John, for a great presentation today. And I also want to thank the audience for being engaged and submitting your question to help guide today's conversation. If we didn't have time to answer yours, we will do our best to follow up with you after the webcast. And as always, we have several resources available on our website. Some of them are already linked in your console, so definitely check those out. And I will keep the webcast console open for a few minutes to give you time to download your CPE certificate. And a copy will be emailed within 3 weeks should you have difficulty downloading it now. And finally, here is a link to an online survey for today's presentation. Please take a moment to complete this survey as your feedback is very important to us. And thank you for joining our webcast. We hope you'll join us again next time.